Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are at almost the halfway stage of the 2024 AFL season, and I did think it would be a good time to sit down and have a look at the crowd numbers because they are booming in season 2024. Now, I am basically going to be ignoring the gather round crowds because you are playing at some different venues, and especially the clubs that are playing at the small capacity venues, you are sort of going to have that data be skewed. So I am only going to be considering the 10 games that every club has played, excluding the gather round game in this data set. And we'll start this off. You can see the AFL crowd from round 1 to 11, excluding gather round, is up 5% on last year. So we are sitting right around 38,500, which is an amazing result when you consider that is either the third or fourth best for any domestic sporting competition in the world. And typically what we do see in the early stages of the season is the crowds really spike early, everyone's excited, the weather is still decent, footy's back. You do have a lot of big games in those early rounds. Obviously you've got your Anzac Days, your Richmond Carltons opening the season. You do also tend to have your rivalry games where they do play one early in the year and one late in the year, like your Showdowns, Derbies, Carlton Collingwood, Carlton Essendon, that sort of thing. But we are up big this year, and there is still a lot of teams in contention for the finals and also the top four. So I expect this trend is going to continue through the winter months. When it does get a bit colder, it does get a bit rainier, and you do normally see those crowds sort of taper away. But I think we could be in for definitely a record, and I think we could be smashing the record this year in terms of crowds. And the reason we do look at the home crowds only, not the home and away crowds, is because you are going to get a bit of a skew, well, a big skew actually, in favour of the Victorian teams. Because if you think about it, the Collingwoods, the Essendons, Carltons, they are going to get generally 16, 17, maybe 18 chances to see their team live in their hometown, whereas obviously the non-Victorian clubs, you only get 12. So it does skew the overall crowd numbers in favour of the Victorian teams. So you can see here the total home and away attendance, including gather round. You can see you have got the big four Victorian clubs. No great surprise there. Collingwood, Carlton, Essendon, Melbourne, Richmond, Geelong. So all of the top six are Victorian, and that is for the reasons that I just went through. So for that reason, I don't like looking at this set of data. I did just want to give a shout out to Ponsford Magpie on Big Footy, who put together this list of the same data that doesn't include gather round. So if you are interested in that data, feel free to pause the video and have a look at that. But moving on, and we will look at the top 6 best performing clubs in terms of crowds for the year 2024 so far. And no great surprise, it is Collingwood on top with around 61,000. You do see there they are actually down around 6% on last year's crowds, which is a little bit of a surprise. Carlton, big movers, up 15% to 59,000. Essendon, wow, up 25% on 2023. That is massive. We know the Bombers are flying at the moment, second on the ladder. If they can hold their form through to the end of the season, that could be a massive number by around 23 or 24. Richmond down slightly, but they are doing a good job of maintaining the crowds given how sort of poor the on-field product is. The Eagles up at 47,000. They're up 13%, and I'd say about 12% of that is because of Harley Reid. He's been amazing to watch, but you've got to give credit to the Eagles, how poor they have been the last few years. Those crowd numbers are really strong, and we will be hopping over to the other side of Perth there. You do see Fremantle, a bit of a surprise, 47,500 average crowd, up 7.8%. So there is a lot of growth left in those WA teams if they are seriously contending in the top 4, pushing for a premiership in the next few years or so. Moving on to the middle 6 in the competition, and in 7th it is the Crows, up 16.5% to nearly 45,000, which, wow, that is a really good result. We know the Crows potentially have been a little bit unlucky not to win a few more games, but they are playing some decent stuff, and geez, if they were a finals team, you know, that number could really be in the 50s. Melbourne, pretty much the same as last year. Geelong up massive, 39%. Now, there's probably a couple of reasons for that. They have played a couple of their home games so far this year at the MCG, which obviously is going to inflate that number. But you do also have the new grandstand down there at Cardinia Park, so that has increased the capacity by around 10 or 15,000, so you are going to see that flow into their crowds going forward. Sydney, again, big movers, up 18%, and I think they are outgrowing the SCG pretty fast. We might have to see a couple of those older grandstands, and no, I'm not talking about the heritage listed stands, but the stands that were built in the 70s and 80s get bulldozed in the next couple of years. And, you know, if we could increase the capacity there up to 55, 60,000, you could see the Swans definitely in the top 6 in terms of crowds. Hawthorn, very nice, up 16% again. That is a good result because we do know they do play a couple of games a year in Launceston. So they are doing well to have such a big increase in their numbers, especially given they are right around the bottom 4 or just above it. Port Adelaide are down slightly. A lot of fans aren't too happy with the fact that Ken Hinkley was kept on last year, so potentially it could be that, but not a terrible result by any standard. And we will turn the page over to the bottom 6, and you can see there St Kilda up 7.8% to around 35,000. They did host Collingwood early in the year at the MCG, so it is largely going to be because of that. And the way the Saints are playing at the moment, yeah, you could see that number go south pretty quickly. Brisbane up a little bit, which is impressive. We do know the Gabba does restrict their crowds to a certain extent, but Brisbane probably out of finals contention at this point, so we might see their crowds taper off a bit. The Bulldogs are down slightly. You do obviously have the Ballarat factor there, but nothing to be concerned about. North are up slightly, but it's really not a good look with the Melbourne team hovering around 20,000. They've played 2 games in Hobart that has attracted around 5,000 people each, or less actually. They got less than 5,000 to the game against Port Adelaide on Saturday, which is really poor. And I wonder if the AFL has to step in and say, you know, listen, we'll pay you out of that Hobart deal, because at this point you're damaging the brand. We know the AFL are going there in 2028 in the form of the Tassie Devils, so you really don't want North Melbourne stinking up the place and doing too much sort of brand damage to the AFL before the Devils do come in. So I wonder whether someone in the AFL, you know, taps them on the shoulder and says, you know, maybe we pay you out and get you guys out of here. We'll have to wait and see. The Gold Coast Suns down 5%, which isn't great. They definitely did have at least one game up there that was raining pretty heavily, but with the Damien Hardwick factor and a few of those exciting young talents, maybe they would like to be going in the other direction. And last but not least, GWS, good improvement there, 17%. Couple of good crowds in Canberra have inflated that, and they did also have the opening round game against Collingwood at Giants Stadium, or whatever it is called now, NG Stadium. That is going to pump that one up a little bit. But anyway, that is just about it for this video, guys. Just a fun little exercise to have a look at, given we are pretty much bang on halfway through the home and away season. Couple of big games coming up in the next couple of weeks. You have got Essendon, Carlton and Collingwood, Melbourne. So I would expect those games to get around about 80,000 plus each and keep this great season of crowds going. And again, because it is so even, I think we are going to set a record and smash the record this year, guys. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe.